This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and I'd like to welcome two members of the Governor's Commission on Integrity. And we'll be talking about that, but I started to say delegate or secretary Viola Baskerville. I could have said councilwoman or vice mayor, for your involvement in city government and in state government has been quite extensive. Now the CEO of the Girl Scouts of the Commonwealth.
Well, maybe that's why
Yes,
I was asked to be on the panel, the integrity piece.
It very well could be. And Courtney Malveaux. Courtney, who's Commissioner, Department of Labor for years and an attorney with Thompson McMullen. Appreciate the two of you being on to help our viewers know about something that's happening this fall and in a sense happening very quickly.
Certainly.
You've had one meeting. I'll tell our viewers that we're having this conversation on November 3rd. By the time they see the program, there already will have been an event over in Charlottesville, public hearing.
Sure.
But we'll tell them about how else they can get involved. But Viola, you start, and Courtney chime in. So you're two of the 10 members of this commission created by Executive Order number 28 of the governor.
Certainly a group of private citizens for
Yes.
the most part, looking at ways in which recommendations can be given both to the governor and the General Assembly with respect to addressing many of the issues we've seen play out over the last year in the court, and also maybe move even further to looking at gifts that legislators get.
I'd also like to say that this commission is very bipartisan. It's also, as you mentioned, comprised of folks who have served in government, which is a big plus. But we also need to make sure that we have input from people in the community. And we have a hearing coming up this Thursday, which will have already occurred by the time this is aired. But not only that hearing, but also each of us and the commission really does need to hear from folks who are affected by this. The waves of folks who are affected by our work goes well beyond the state capitol.
Yeah, I think it's almost cycled around in that legislators are elected by citizens. Citizens send them to the General Assembly. Issues arise, and then there is an opportunity to have a commission composed of citizens again, going back and looking and examining what went wrong and trying to make recommendations.
We'll make sure we have up on the screen for our viewers quite a few times during the program the website where they can go and can make comments, and you actually can go and see the comments that others have made. When I was checking it just over the weekend, I was reading the 21 comments that had already been submitted that were there for public view. The names of the people are not shown, so you're not saying, oh, that was this person or that person, but it's an opportunity online to make some comment. And I said that it was the Governor's Commission on Integrity. The full name is Integrity and Public Trust. public confidence in state government.
Right.
So I think the public confidence in state government.
I think the thing that is really what is at the core of this. How can citizens trust that individuals are representing them rather than representing the individual's own interests? And so to the extent we can tighten up some guidelines, make recommendations for the General Assembly to enact on other aspects of gifts and travel and expenditures that are not buttoned down in Virginia as much as they need to be, I think this will probably go some way toward increasing public trust in individuals that are supposed to be representing people.
Now, you've both been around Capitol Square in different capacities, also down in the Attorney General's office that I
Right.
didn't mention. That you served there. Is one of the challenges perhaps coming out of this when it's all done, General Assembly convenes, making recommendations that will then pass the General Assembly?
Please.
I'm certain that is a great challenge, but remember 2015 is going to be an interesting year. When the General Assembly is in session, certainly maybe at the beginning or sometime during the General Assembly session, there will be a decision made on court case that has evolved over the last year.
Yes.
So we may very well see a high elected Virginia representative, going to serving some time in jail. We do not know what, but certainly legislators will have that at the back of their mind. I do know as soon as it's an opportunity for legislators to put in legislation, they will be, which will be shortly later this month. And then it's re-election for many of the General Assembly members. And so they're going to be asked by their constituents, what have you done? What did you do to address this situation? So there's going to be some sort of pressure, I think, coming on to the legislators from the outside.
And that's an important piece, and also another very important piece, which I've mentioned in our last meeting, and I hope that will really take root following our work this winter, is that a lot of the work has to be done by the press. It has to be done by public, certainly public advocates of open government, and folks, there are watchdog groups that watch the actions of our officials. And in the end, there are some important pieces of legislation that can move and regulations that may apply. But we can regulate, we can legislate. In the end, I do think that ethics is something that's going to have to be encoded in the hearts and minds of those who engage in public affairs.
I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to legislate ethics. You can encourage it, you can give guidelines, you can make legislation, you can put in the code. But accountability is something that really has to evolve from the person themselves.
Now, I was looking at if you go on the site, as you all know, but I want to make sure our viewers know, if they go on the site, they'll see 6 different charges that the governor has given you, and then he gave you an open-ended one at the end. And the first one was for comprehensive government ethics. And it starts off speaking of the benefits of a more independent ethics commission for oversight of conflicts of interest matters. So, have you already had some discussion in your first meeting about whether there should be an independent ethics commission? And I ask that in the context that as we all know, and perhaps most of our viewers know, there was legislation enacted this past year. I should say in the 2014 session.
Sure.
In this current calendar year, the governor chose not to fund it, but it was not an independent ethics commission that was enacted into law.
It has to be done very carefully because, as you know, we have a separation of powers. The executive, judicial, and legislative branches each have a fair amount of self-governance that would apply unless they abdicated, and so that's one consideration. We are looking at some sort of an ethics panel that would look at gifts, not just the tangible gifts, but also intangible. And one issue that we've discussed is to what extent that panel, that independent panel, can provide meaningful input. And there could be issues as to whether that could be made mandatory, that all gifts must be banned unless cleared by such a panel, or is it advisory only? And so that's something that we've left as a discussion that we'll continue to have and hear from folks on.
And I'm certain that states that do have commissions, they've had to go through the same type of discussion. How do we get legislators, executive office people to have skin in the game so they're vested in the outcomes? How do we make this effective, have teeth in it, whether there is ability to have any type of action post-discovery or post-investigation? All of those will have to be subjects, or will be the subjects of continuing conversations.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is instances where I've seen when I was in public service, and how would that work in those types of situations. For example, let's say you have a young lady who works in state government, and a young man proposes to her. She can't exactly say, well, yes, but let me get pre-clearance from this panel on whether I can accept this ring. I mean, at some point it has to make some sense. There has to be some kind of guidance. There has to be some kind of precedent. But in the end, it does have to make sense, and it can't necessarily stop everybody to wait however long for some independent panel to review every single exchange.
But on the other hand, where there is clearly a borderline situation, having a pre-clearance by some commission certainly gives the individual some comfort that they have at least gone to a third party to say yes or no, this is or is not allowed.
You know, I'm recalling a guest of almost a year ago, sitting in the chair, and I think it was during the time we were taping. It might have been before that. But he gave the example of, let's say I have a daughter and she's applying to state universities and she gets a full ride. Was that a gift to me? Well, he said it certainly was a gift. It would be a gift to me, it happened. But did she get that on her own, or did she get that because her dad is a delegate or a senator? And that gets into another rather complicated matter that would need to be considered, whether a gift to one's child of a scholarship. It could be a private school that gives the gift, thinking the legislator will be helpful to us.
Sure, and in the end, if there's too much rigidity to what comes out of the General Assembly, then it would be putting square pegs in round holes, and so there has to be a certain amount of flexibility, and to allow public officials and those who engage in government affairs to use some common sense, and
That's what
to
I was
use
say.
the
Common sense has
right.
to somehow come into all of this.
Right.
I think maybe in the past that item was lacking, and again, but you want to have legislation, or you want to have recommendations that would give and allow some sort of flexibility in those sort of difficult situations.
I remember my father, he was a medical school dean, and he was exactly in that kind of situation where his arm's getting twisted by public officials who can have a say-so in terms of whether they get their funding. Now, he held the line. Did all deans and college presidents do that? I don't know, but he had to hold that line. In the end, I don't know that you can always regulate or legislate someone into making good decisions.
You know, one item that's not on your list of 6, and if it appears as a written comment, someone's going to think for sure that I submitted it, is I think you should consider increasing the salary of members of the General Assembly. And I'll say just another word, then I want to get your all's opinion. I think that way back when there was discussion in the 1980s about transportation, people said, you know, we should have fixed it so that it would be some incremental increases. Well, it's been the same length of time since salaries have been increased, and I think because it affects people's sometimes willingness to run for office or to serve, and that 18,000 in the mid-1980s is a lot different from 18,000 in 2015.
It doesn't sound like much either time frame.
Well, either you really love public service, or you can afford to do that, or whatever circumstances you want to work under those that low pay, but it is, and I don't think most people realize it. I don't think most citizens in Virginia realize that even though this is a citizen legislature, $18,000 a year is below the poverty level. And it really makes it difficult to attract good individuals because they have to sacrifice so much of their time if they have a job outside of, a career outside the General Assembly. It is a sacrifice.
And that citizen legislature piece, I agree, is very important. I visited Massachusetts, and they have legislators, I think it was Massachusetts if I recall correctly, and they're kind of standing around and not milling around, not doing much. I discovered they're full-time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this doesn't need to be your full-time job representing this district where you're from. I definitely think we need to make sure that it's still part-time, however we
Adequately compensate individuals for their time.
And
Right.
probably compensated to the level of the larger jurisdictions in the Commonwealth who compensate their members of city council or boards of
Well,
supervisors.
boards of supervisors get paid more. Local city
yes.
council members get paid more than General Assembly members. I think in the city of Richmond, it's $25,000 now for city council members. I do know the board of supervisors get more than that. So when you're looking
Right.
at the responsibilities of a delegate and a senator versus a locally elected official, although all politics is local, you do
Yes.
see a discrepancy there.
Well, now, this leads us into one of the other charges that you all have to look at from the governor. That's campaign finance. Because running campaigns, if you compare 30 years ago to now and what the campaigns cost, and rules, as it says, regarding the contributions. So I guess that's another issue you'll be addressing.
We may have to extend this commission much longer than the governor originally intended to.
It's going to be hard to end it for the 2015.
A lot of deep issues.
And the third item was disclosure, oversight, and enforcement. Because sometimes it's difficult, it would be difficult for citizens to get the information, and then the enforcement side being the other side.
You know, if I could, there's one issue that that really probably needs some looking at is the disclosure and timely disclosure, certainly after gifts.
Yes.
And that's one issue that I keep hearing is one that we can really tighten up on. If you disclose months after the fact, then it has a lot less effect, and people can't respond. The press,
Exactly.
memories fade, and people can't respond as effectively to a gift or to see whether it was proper or not. And so maybe looking at the finance disclosure in campaigns and starting to borrow some concepts from that and weaving that into the gift part could make a lot of sense in terms of helping the press and the public
Sure.
to know what these gifts are really about.
The fourth item on your list on this short-term commission, selection and services of judges and other public officials, procedures for improving the selection of judges.
Well, as it is in Virginia now, judges are chosen through the General Assembly and panels, judiciary panels. And of course, then they're voted on by the members of the legislature. So whether or not we want to, what types of recommendations we want to make with respect to that. Of course, citizens are welcome to speak at those hearings, to come in and have a moment to speak on a particular candidate.
And occasionally they do.
And occasionally they do. So that would be another almost all day, I think, session with respect to review.
One day.
Well, just for hearing from people all day.
We were talking about today being
Right.
the 3rd of November.
Yes.
A week from today, the 10th, just as some people are starting to see this program that we're having recorded today, the General Assembly will be back in session to elect judges, Supreme Court Justice, Courts of Appeals, and then some, if not all, of the remaining 10 local judges that have not yet been elected. So sometimes the election of judges goes on a long time. I think this year may be a record in the length of time.
It'll be interesting to see what ideas come forward. And I'll say in disclosure that I've been involved in that process as an attorney, and I'm married to a judge. And so I've seen that process up a little closer than most. And I have to say that looking at the process, a lot of other states elect their judges from the
Yes, they
general
do.
public. I'm not so sure you can have a less political system that way. And it could be one of those things where, you know, it's maybe the worst possible process except all others. But I think we'll take a look at that with an open mind and see if there are any ways that that can be tweaked.
Number 5 on your list, a second consecutive term for Virginia's governor.
I know when I was in the General Assembly, that came up at least 2 times. And whichever party was in the majority or minority, either or did not want it to happen. One of the things that we know consistently happens is the governor gets elected, comes in, and the budget is not the governor's budget. The governor is about halfway through the governor's term before they really can start looking at setting priorities, and then it's time to leave. There is a loss of continuity of information, infrastructure. Even if the next governor that comes in is in the same party, then that governor has initiatives and priorities he wants or she wants to move forward. So, yeah, I think Virginia does not need to be in a minority in this. I think we need to really, really look at the benefits of the governor being able to succeed himself or herself.
I was very glad to see the governor raise the issue of extending beyond 1 term and also looking at that really awkward situation with the budget. And so there are concerns raised about us having a more powerful government than a lot of governor than in other states. But there's probably a way that we can actually let the people have more of a referendum on the performance of the governor.
The last time I'm aware that the General Assembly studied the issue of 2-term governors was 1990. I remember that because I was one of the citizen members on the commission. And without disclosing where I came down on it, it was interesting. We had every former governor, living governor, to comment. Some wanted 1 term, some 2 terms. Governor Holton had the most unique idea, and one of your comments that's been submitted online has that same perspective, and that is 1 term, but for 6 years, to give the governor a longer period of time. And the ones who spoke against the 2-term were saying, as soon as you're elected, you're fundraising for your next term as governor. And then the other arguments that you've made very well about why there are advantages of 2 terms. So that's, well, before our time gets away, the last issue, and it's the one that has received the most written comments among the 21 comments, redistricting. That's the issue. The governor wrote it as various other government reforms, in which redistricting was one, and that's the one which I think 15 or 16 people have already written in comments and said, do something about redistricting.
Well, as most people may or may not know, the last gubernatorial commission that looked at this was just recently, 3 years ago, in 2011. We had over 300 citizens to give input. We had 70 people to actually speak at a hearing. We had a contest. There was a contest as part of that commission study where college students, law students gave their iterations of what could be some districts that would meet constitutional muster, both federal constitution and Virginia constitutional muster. We even had a winner of that competition. And it is very interesting what can be done when individuals who don't have a partisan agenda are put together or put to the task. And so now with this recent court decision, Virginia again is in the spotlight. You got to do something. Can't kick this can down the road another term, another 4 years.
That's a nice thorny issue to end the discussion on.
Yes,
and of course, that's something that would require a state constitutional amendment. So it would have to be something that is truly embraced on a bipartisan basis.
Of course, you were very kind as a former member of the House. You didn't give the last part, and that was after all that work, it was substantially ignored.
It was ignored.
By the General Assembly and by the governor, and what was signed. It just went on and was done the way it usually was done.
Well, I think at some point the frustration is going to be no longer do what you want to do, legislature. Let's really listen to people.
Well, and perhaps, as you were saying, that this matter now being before the courts may may spur it on. Our time is up. We'll have to have this conversation again as you all continue your work on this very important commission. Thank you both for being
Thank
with
you.
us week in
Thank
Richmond.
you.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.